I'm Michael Berryman. Welcome to our program. Over the last 3.5 decades, I've worked on some of the most renowned horror films in Hollywood. Over the years, I've learned that one of the most essential elements to creating a great, scary film is realistic special effects makeup. Makeup artists, they bring to life the monsters that terrify us, the wounds and the injuries that make us very squeamish, and the effects that speak to our deepest of fears. You're going to meet one of the top professionals in the field of horror and monster effects, Christina Rodriguez. She's going to show you some of the most innovative horror makeup techniques used in Hollywood today. Techniques that until now have been closely guarded Hollywood insiders.
Hey, my name is Christina Rodriguez, and today we're going to be doing some special effects makeup, my favorite. I love monsters, and I'm going to show you all my favorite tricks on how to do a zombie.
For this look, we're going to need a few things. Rigid collodion. We're going to need two colors, red and burgundy. Red pencil liner, burgundy pencil liner, Krylon's rubber mask grease paint, the RMG palette, synthetic brush, scab blood, two colors of eyeshadow, a bone white color and also gray, tooth stain, 99% alcohol, food coloring, and mouthwash.
Alright, so first thing we want to do before we get started with makeup is prep the face. You want to make sure that your model has no lotions, no sunscreens, and if you're working with the female character, you want to make sure that you have their hair pinned back out of their face. We're working with Marty today, so we don't have to worry about that. Okay, the next thing you want to think about is what are you going to do to your model? You want to make sure that you're thinking from a logical point of view. You don't want to do anything that's really random. We're going to be doing some really light decay on this zombie today, a freshly turned zombie. So we don't want to make it too ghoulish. One of the things you want to make sure you do is either read your script really well, study it, break it down, and if you don't have a script, then you want to make sure that you have some type of reference pictures or perhaps sketch something out if you can't find anything that you really like. Communication is really important. You want to make sure that your model is aware of what products you're going to be using on them, and you want to make sure that they don't have any skin conditions or any allergies. You want to make sure you also test it on their skin if you haven't done this on them before. One of the products we're going to be using today can be a little bit harsh. We've already taken care of that and tested that on Marty, so we're going to go ahead and get started. The product we're going to be using today is called Rigid Collodion. We're going to be working with two colors. We're going to be using both while they're wet. The important thing is to start layering. So the first time you start applying, you want to make sure that you're only using one color. We're going to start right here by the mouth, and we want to be really careful because you don't want to get any of this product inside of the mouth. The lips are the most sensitive part of the face, and when you're applying this makeup, it will really pull the skin in extremely around the mouth. You're starting with this burgundy color, and you want to move on to another color in a slightly different area adjacent to that and start blending it right into that wet area. The reason why we're doing this is we want to work with it while it's wet so that you don't have any lines showing. Okay, so you're going to start layering these as they're drying. You go back over them when you start to see them pull in and dry a little bit, and you just want to keep going out and extending that pattern throughout the face. You can go in any direction you want. Just make sure that you're making it very sporadic and the pattern looks a little bit rigid around the edges. We're creating decay, so you want to have some really irregular patterns on the face. All makeup artists need to think very logically. If you're not familiar with some type of a creature or a character that you're creating, you want to make sure you go and study that online. You can watch videos, you can do research on the internet. You want to make sure that you're focusing on wherever that decay is starting from. There has to be a starting point, and it has to gradually extend out so that it makes a little bit of sense. So we're starting around the mouth area, and we're just going to extend that up through the face. Today we're going to take that up into close to the eye area. and start layering this product over and over. When you start to see it dry, don't be afraid to go right back over it and add some more. The more you add, the more it starts to pull that skin in together. You can start seeing that deformation on the lip. Any kind of little strings that you see, make sure you pull them off of the mouth and make sure it does not go into the mouth area. Now that we have all of the placement of the decay and we have it positioned and we have some continuity in the face, we're going to go ahead and move on to the eyes. A lot of makeup artists forget to focus on the eyes, and one of the things we need to do is to make them look a little bit sickly. Remember, we're doing a zombie that's freshly turned, so we want to make sure that his eyes aren't as bright as they are right now. The first thing we're going to start with is lining those eyes, and then we'll add on a little bit more color after and layer it. Some pencils tend to be a little bit on the dry side, and that might be really irritating. So as you can see when I'm putting it on, I want to make sure you look up. It's a little bit bright, but we're going to go ahead and feather that out a little bit later. I'll show you how to do that. You can always blend that out and not make it look like there's a line of blood under the eyes. Okay, Marty, look down for me, please. Chin up. Make sure you're going right into that lash line. I'm mixing a few different colors in there. I start off with a really bright red, and now I'm putting a little bit of a brick underneath. All right, Marty, can you look down? And I'm doing light strokes right now because I don't want to do a thick line across. I'm trying to pull that original color that I placed on there and pulling it out and feathering it out so that it's not so bright. So I'm using the actual pencil to blend it. And I'm just continuing right beneath that original line that I created, and I'm just softly adding a little bit of this brick color underneath and dragging it down so that you don't have a really sharp line. The next product we're going to be using is called Krylon. Krylon is a rubber mask grease paint. It has a lot more oil in it than the pencils do. There's a variety of colors. It actually has a couple layers here. We're going to be using just the top layers, some burgundies, reds, and a little bit of the bone color, but just around the eye areas, mostly the reds. Okay, I'm going to wipe some of it off on my wrist. You don't want to have too much pigment. Just start off lightly. Look down for me, chin up to the floor, there you go. Start feathering it upwards. If you feel like you have too much pigment on, you can go ahead and space it out, start going all over the eye area and not concentrate in one spot. All right, when we're spreading this rubber mask grease paint around, you want to make sure that you don't have too much pigment on your brush. Sometimes you can just wipe it off on your wrist, but also you can just take your brush and go around in sporadic areas and thin that makeup out. You don't want it to be too opaque, because you want it to look like the skin is still translucent. Okay, move on to the next eye. Marty, keep your chin up and look down for me. Same thing on the other eye. We're going to try not to concentrate that makeup in one spot. We're going to spread it around very sporadically. Make sure some of that flesh is still showing through. You can even bring the paint up and over through the eyebrows. Remember to think logically again. When you're irritating the eye area, it's not just going to be concentrated right over the eyelid. You want to spread it around and bring it down below the eye, into the temple, and above the brow bone. Same thing underneath. Be really careful under the eye again. You don't want to irritate the eye. You want to go really slow. If your actor gets a little squirmish, you see him tearing up, just pause for a bit. Marty's doing okay now. Remember, if you have too much pigment, you can wipe that off right on your wrist and thin it out, spread it out a little bit more. All right, we've got our eyes finished now. We're gonna go ahead and continue with that same color and the same product right around the nose area. Remember, we're trying to be really thorough here and have some continuity. So we're gonna go right into the little curve around the nose. And again, if you have too much pigment, wipe that pigment off and start to feather that makeup out gradually. Should be darker in the very center, and then it should feather out much lighter around the edges. Might tickle a little bit, just go right up into that nostril. Just make a little curve there and start to feather it out. If you feel you have too much pigment, you can just blend it out with your fingers. Okay, don't be afraid to do that also around the mouth area. Just very, very lightly. Don't want to overdo it. You can also bring a little bit of color around the tip of the nose. All right, looks like we're done there. Okay, we have the redness all around the eye area, the nose, and the mouth. So we're going to go back in and make it a little bit more irritated by adding a little bit of vein. We're going to start with the same product that we used before, and we're going to use the same color. It's really important that you use a really fine point brush, such as this. This is a typical eyeliner brush. Okay, make sure that you're wiping off any excess pigment. You're going to start at the base of the lashes. Look down for me. And just start creating little lines. And you almost don't need to apply any pressure at all. You can also start in different areas over the eyebrow and bring it up and make sure that that line is not a straight line. It has to be a little jagged. And you're barely applying any pressure at all, just letting that brush slide over the face, creating sort of like tree branches. If you feel like you've made a mistake, you can always go back in with your finger and blend it right out. The reason we're also going above the eye area is we want to make sure that, again, there's continuity and all the skin around the eye is irritated. Again, we're just creating subtle lines, little tree branches. You can also mix in other colors. We're starting with the red, but we'll be going back in and mixing a little bit of burgundy. Make sure you're always consistently wiping off that extra color and pigment that's on there. All right, we just finished doing the veins on the face. Now the skin looks nice and sickly. We're gonna go back into the sores where all the decay is and add a little bit more dimension. And we're gonna continue with the same makeup and the same brush. And we're gonna use a burgundy color and just go in and add some hints of color in there. We're only gonna go on the outer edge. You don't wanna go anywhere near the center. And you wanna start from the outside going in. There's barely any pigment on my brush. Remember, when you're reapplying, to go ahead and wipe the excess pigment onto your wrist. You can also wipe it off onto a paper towel, whatever you're more comfortable with. You can also feather some of the makeup out onto the flesh. It's short little strokes. Don't bring the makeup out too far. Just make that edge look a little bit more jagged. All right, right, as you can see, I'm going from the outer edge and feathering this makeup inward, and I'm using a slightly darker color than the colors that were applied originally to the sores. The reason why we want to create the darker color is that's what gives it that dimension and depth. It makes it look like the skin is actually dropping and sinking in. So if you start in the center, it's going to take away from that effect. You always want to just do the outer edge and feather that inward and fade it away. We can start here also on the nose so you can see from the very top, and you're barely adding any pigment at all with small little feathery strokes. And bring it inward and keep switching the direction of your brush so that you're not just creating vertical lines or horizontal lines. You just want to go all the way around and bring it in towards the center. Right, we've got all of our color on the face, we've got all of the dimension now. We want to go back in with a little bit of Ben Nice scab blood. This blood's really great because it's not very runny, so it looks really good. It adheres to the skin and it doesn't move around too much. And this just makes it look like this decay is really fresh. Blood's opening up those sores and seeping through a little bit. I'm using a toothpick to apply. The reason why we're not using a brush is most of the product will remain on the brush and it won't adhere to the skin that well. So we're going to do the same thing with the outer edge, and we're not going to put too much of this on, just in sporadic areas. All right, as a logical makeup artist, you want to make sure that you're not using runny blood. We're just using this scab blood because we're doing a decay. For an injury that's just occurred, you might want to use something that's a little bit runnier. But for this, we only need to have something that stays in place, that looks like it's barely seeping through. We just finished doing some dimension, adding some depth to some of those decayed areas. Now we're going to go over the bone structure and just make the zombie look a little bit like he's lost a little weight. The way we're going to do that is with a little bit of eyeshadow. I'm going to start with a slightly darker color. And with this, you definitely want to make sure you don't have too much pigment on the brush, so I like to wipe a little bit off onto my hands. And I'm going to go right into the natural curves of the body, and you're going to start at the lowest point and start feathering that up. It's really nice if you try to follow the natural contour of the body. So I'm just using a cool brown to do this. If you have too much, you can always go back in with a clean brush and wipe some of it off. If you make a really big mistake, you can use baby wipes to clean it, but you can usually correct it with a fairly clean brush. Okay, don't forget to go around the jawline. If you start to move into the jawline area, make sure that you use a slightly wider brush. And you're just basically tracing that jawline and the chin, making sure to always wipe off that excess makeup. Go right around the face. Don't forget underneath the ears. And it's okay if it looks a little bit dirty. Again, this is just a zombie, so it's not too important to make them look like a natural skin tone. They will look a little bit grayed out in some areas. Don't forget the temples as well. And go right back into the hairline, right under the cheek. And don't forget the sides of the nose. Just follow all those natural bone structures around the face. This is just basically contouring. You can also go up into the forehead and right into that hairline, bring it down. Right, it's really important to make sure that you're not just stopping on the face and that you bring all the makeup down through the whole neck area and onto the collar. The collar is an area where you can really play with the shape and create a lot more depth. Make sure you always go underneath that collarbone and all the way across and right above it. You can also layer different colors. If you want to make it a little bit more exaggerated, you can even add a slightly darker color at the very bottom. So you can start off with a light brown and go with something a little bit cooler and darker right beneath. Just be careful not to overdo it. Keep wiping that pigment off. Okay, and we're just about done with the shadow. We're going to go back in after this and we're going to start adding the highlights to really make those bones pop a little bit. Okay, we've got our shadows on. We're going to go back in and we're going to add some highlight to really make those bones pop out. And we want to start off with using a really light color, something that's almost like a bone color. And it's going to be a little bit exaggerated. Make sure you tap off that excess pigment and go right on top of that bone and just trace it right in between where you've created the shadows. Don't be afraid to layer. The more you layer, the more it's going to look like it's popping out. You want to use a slightly smaller brush so that you can get in between those small little areas. Anywhere where you see a point that's sticking out a little bit, you want to add a lot more highlight there. And if your powder's a little bit loose, you can even pat it on to make that pigment stick a little bit better. You can already start to see these bones really look like they're being zombified. Don't forget the sides of the neck. Make sure you're avoiding all those decayed areas that you've just created. You can even add a little bit of color around it, a little bit of white to make that skin pop out. Go right above the jawline where you've created the shadow. Onto the bridge of the nose. And over the brow. All right, we've just finished contouring the body and a little bit around the face as well. I'm gonna go back in and I'm gonna turn Marty this way, and the last highlight that we're gonna be adding is right over that decayed area. And we're going back with this Krylon palette because we wanna use the same makeup that you were using to create this decay in the first place. Also, it works a little bit better than the powder for smaller areas because you don't want the powder to get into that blood and all the other grease makeup that we've just applied. So I'm only going to be going right above all this decay. We don't want to go underneath it too much because remember, logically the light hits from above, so you want to make sure that it's highlighted on top and not underneath too much. Wipe off that excess makeup a little bit on your wrist. Make sure there's not too much heavy pigment anywhere. Again, barely adding any color at all. And be careful not to go into the area where you have any red or any blood, just right above it. All right, we've got all the makeup on our character here. We've got the decay, we've got the highlights, and we just finished doing a little bit of contouring around those injuries. Next thing we're gonna do is take care of these pearly whites. We have a zombie here with really clean teeth and we don't want that. We want them to look a little bit scarier. So we're gonna use this product that's actually a tooth lacquer palette. It's a decay and it's temporarily going to stain his teeth. So we want to make sure that we talk to the client and explain what we're doing. We want them to feel very comfortable. We don't want them to not understand what we're about to do to them. So what I'm going to be doing first before we begin is make sure that I have a 99% alcohol available. This is only activated with 99% alcohol. If you use anything less, it's not going to work. And the next thing we're going to do is clean the teeth off and get them prepped. So I'm going to move right into that. You want to make sure that you have a paper towel handy. One of the things I ask my clients to do is to make an oh crap face. You know, when you do something wrong, you make a mistake, you kind of like suck some of that air in and make sure that you're keeping the teeth dry. So I'm going to clean them off and I'm going to have them do that consistently so that the saliva doesn't come back out onto the towel. So go ahead and show me those teeth. And just get right on the teeth and start buffing them out and drying them off. Okay. And Marty's not going to be able to open his mouth too much because we don't want to mess that makeup up. It's all right, we just need to take care of a few teeth. And as he's drawing those teeth, spray your 99% alcohol directly onto the palette. And we're going to start with the lightest color first. We're using sort of a nicotine color. It's a little bit of a mustard. You're going to wipe off some of that excess paint and go right over the teeth and just start painting it right on. You can already see his teeth turning yellow. And go right under the bottom ones too. Keep breathing in. Make sure you have them keep breathing. You can start to add a little bit of brown over the top. Get right in there into the gum line. Okay, remember that this zombie has just slightly turned, so we don't want to overdo it. You just want to have hints of black in there, mostly a little bit of nicotine over the whole tooth. All right, remember your zombie has just turned, so you don't want to have too much pigment. You can actually spray a little bit of 99% alcohol and wipe your brush clean and start wiping some of that off if you have a little bit too much. You just want to have hints of black on the teeth, not too much, and mostly they just want to be a little bit yellow. So start to dilute that if you put too much on. Remember, logically, you have to have something that makes sense, and your zombie has just turned, so you don't want them to have really ghoulish missing teeth or anything like that. All right, just make sure that you have your zombie breathing in. Keep your mouth open. Make sure that it's thoroughly dry before he closes his mouth, or else it's going to wipe some of that off. This is just going to temporarily stain. You want to make sure that you do this at the very end because you want to make sure that your client is comfortable and has eaten and had plenty of water to drink throughout the day. The last thing that I'm about to show you guys is one of my biggest secrets. I've worked for a haunted house for many, many years, and one of the main things that I do at the end is I stain the inside of the talent's mouth. What I do is I take food coloring, and there's usually 4 basic colors. Sometimes I add a little bit of black, but we use red, green, yellow, and orange. And I put about 6 drops of each color into a little cup. You don't need a whole lot because it's really highly pigmented. So what we're going to do is have Marty swish it around his mouth just a little bit and spit it right back out into the cup, and that's going to create a really gnarly effect. There you go, Marty. Swish it around your teeth, your tongue, and you can spit it out when you're ready. All right. Smile for the camera. And it's just temporary. Again, this is going to dilute a lot, and obviously this is a little bit much, so you always want to make sure that you wipe some of it and blend the edges off and have it fade away so that it's not too bright. You can even blend it up into the upper lip a little bit, just so that it's not just clean on top and really dark on the bottom. And Marty, can you open your mouth a little bit? Just dab some of that off if you need to. All right, and there you have it. This is some of my favorite techniques on how to create a zombie. And remember, again, this is a zombie that's just turned, and I hope you've learned a lot and can go ahead and practice this at home.
This look requires a few supplies: a palette knife, 3rd-degree silicone prosthetic material, metal or plastic cup, Krylon's rubber mask grease paint, synthetic brush, scab bled, and a blending brush.
We're going to be doing an injury. It's one of the most requested things that you'll ever hear when you're working on set. We're going to be doing a build-up injury, and that's going to require some 3rd degree, which is a silicone mixture of an A and B part. So we're going to be molding it together, we're going to be mixing it up, and we're going to start building it up and creating some 3-dimensional depth on the chest area here of our model. Okay, before we get started with making this build-up, this injury, we need to make sure that the skin's prepped. So what we've done is we've made sure that there's no moisturizers or anything like that on the skin, and we have to start clean. Also make sure that you're explaining the product again to your model, and that they understand if they have some type of an allergic reaction, to let you know ahead of time. So you might want to test this on their wrist area before you get started. Another thing you want to consider is to make sure that your model doesn't have any hair on the chest. You can either ask them to shave it in advance. Some makeup artists carry razors with them. You can also have the model go over to a bathroom and take care of that before you get started. But I highly recommend that they do it prior to coming on set, because the skin needs to heal a little bit. And what happens is, if when you go to remove the makeup, their skin may be a little bit irritated, and some of the products have alcohol, so I don't think that they'd like that too much. All right, we've got our two parts of the third degree here. We have the A part and the B part. You want to make sure that you don't contaminate either one of them, so you don't want any of the A to get into the B. So make sure that you have a palette knife, and in between dipping into the jars, you want to make sure to clean that off very well. Another thing you need to consider is that these products dry very fast. It cures really quickly. You have about a 4 to 5 minute window working time. The skin is really warm, and it naturally warms it up and cures the product faster. So make sure that you're only working with small areas at a time, especially when you're new at this and you're practicing. And it will adhere to itself, so it's not a problem. You can continue to add on and just keep going from there. One more thing that we're going to need besides this palette knife is a little metal cup. And the reason why you want to have something metal is you want to be able to clean it off in between when you keep mixing new batches of this. And also, it's nice and cold, so it helps keep it from curing faster. So we're going to go ahead and start with an equal amount. It's going to be mixed 50-50. So whatever amount you get out, make sure that the second part of it has an equal amount. And remember again to make sure that you clean this off in between. Do not dip part A into part B, or you're going to contaminate it and not be able to use it again. All right, you have the two products next to each other. Go ahead and start quickly mixing them up. Make sure you don't see any of that clear color. Okay, as soon as you have a pretty even mixture, start applying it. We're going to go in a diagonal direction and start on the chest, right about the center. And we're going to go right through that tattoo there to make it look like the injury has cut right into that and taken that pigment right away. Starts off kind of gummy, and you can just let it sit there and it'll start to droop a little bit, but as it starts to dry, you can go back in and start molding it. All right, when you're creating this look, make sure that you think about this from a logical point of view. You want to know where this injury is started and where it's ending. So we're going to make it look like this was a club that's gone deep into his chest, and it's going to come out and it's going to thin out towards the top into sort of an apex. So you'll see me making the wound a little bit thinner towards the very end. It's okay if some of it drips down a little bit, as it's going to be a little bit gummy at first. You can just take that palette knife and push that product right back up, because the center part is going to be filled in with paint and blood, so it's not really much of a big deal. As it starts to dry, make sure you're lifting those edges and clean off your palette knife so that you can sculpt it easily. Just start pulling it out a bit. You can start to see the wall starting to form a little. Okay, remember we are making a torn wall of flesh, so it's okay if you make mistakes. It does not have to be perfect. It doesn't even have to look exactly realistic. It just has to be exaggerated and have a little formation that starts to come up. You're going to be filling a lot of this in with makeup, so don't worry about the edges being exactly straight. The more jagged they are, the more realistic it looks. All right, we're back again with this injury that we've created. We finished molding it. It's already cured, it's dry, so now we're going to go ahead and add some color and some depth to that by using a Krylon product. Krylon is a rubber mask grease paint, and we have some colors that we're going to be using: burgundy, a little bit of red, a little bit of black. We're going to make it look like this is a fresh wound and that there's a big gash, so you have to add some kind of blood and depth to it and make it look like there's a hole in the chest. So the first thing we're going to do is start with a lighter color, and then we'll gradually move to the darker colors. We're going to put this color on a little bit heavy, so make sure that you're doing it in a pattern where you're modeling the paint. Modeling is just basically going in a random sporadic pattern and layering colors on top of each other. You just want to create texture with that makeup. So you're not going to do it opaque. You're going to leave some spaces in between, and then you're going to go back in with a slightly darker color and go around those areas, and always leave an uneven texture. It's really important to know what modeling is. It's one of the most frequently used words on set, so it's good to look it up and practice that. It looks different when you're using different paints, so make sure you practice that and get to know what modeling is. We're almost done with our first color. Make sure you're not going on top of the outer edge, and the reason you're doing that is because this flesh looks like it's ripped open. You don't want too much color to be on top. You want the flesh to show so that it actually looks like there's that big gash inside of the chest area and there's a hole there. So go right up into that line and don't go past that. There will be some areas where you add color, but we're not going to get to that yet. Now we're going to go back in with this burgundy. Same brush, same product, and start modeling again. You're going to model so it's going to be in the sporadic pattern and layering colors on top of each other. So you can still see the color underneath that I just applied. Don't completely cover it. Okay, usually with this darker color you want to go right up to the edge and start feathering it inward. Remember, as you're adding the darker colors, you want them to be darkest on the outside and then be gradient and feathered towards the inside so that you still have mostly the lighter color in the middle there. As you can see, I'm just taking this all the way around the edge and brushing it inwards. Still feathering it so that you have the darkest color on the outside. You can also begin to drag it up into some areas to make it look like there's a little bit of blood on some of those skin little flaps that we've created. Go all the way to the end. And right here where we've created this apex, you want to really start feathering it out and making it look like there's almost like a scrape mark. I'm just feathering it a little bit into that flesh flap that we've created. Now we're going to start with the next darkest color, which is the black. And you really want to be careful not to overdo the black, but start with the outer edge again and go right over that dark burgundy that we just did. You'll start to see that sort of hole up here, and there's some texture that we have in here with some of the 3rd degree. Go right over that texture, it creates some really nice bumps. Makes it really gross. Okay, again, making sure that you're not covering up that lightest color. You can still see some of that show through. Okay, one of the things I'm doing right now is I'm just adding a little bit of color around it because we're going to be making it look like a little bit of blood has splattered or maybe stained the skin or bruised the skin. So I'm just adding a hint of color underneath, not too much. Same thing on top, just really light hints of color so that it's not a plain flesh. You want it to look like the area's a little bit swollen because of course he was just hit with a big giant club. Just go right in there, and if you put too much, you can always take your thumb or any clean finger and wipe it away. It should come right off. Don't bring the makeup too close to the very edge because bruises won't start underneath the injury. It usually starts a little bit further away from it. And again, make sure you're thinking logically. You can always do some research on bruises and gashes before you get started to know where you need to place that color. All right, we finished doing all our color. We now have some dimension, and the last thing we need to do, of course, is add some blood. We're going to add some veiny fresh scab blood. This blood is really great because it doesn't beat up. If you try to use a runny blood on top of grease makeup, it's not going to adhere. It's just going to beat up, and it's not going to show, and it's going to drip down, and it just won't look as realistic. So we're going to go ahead and get started with this. Just need to work with a little bit at a time and just start putting it in and spreading it around like jelly, just like you would on toast. All right. Don't put it all over the entire wound because you don't want to cover up all of the work that you just did with the modeling. You want some of those colors to show through. So just work it around. You can put it a little bit thicker on some areas than others. But as you can see, it's already starting to look a little bit more realistic. Make sure you let some of that lighter color show through. And even let some of it sit on the very bottom edge of that flap that you created, as if it were just about to spill over. All right, the last thing we're going to do is we've already got our blood inside the wound. We just want to make it look like a little bit has spilled out onto the chest, right where you had added a little bit of that bruising, and blood naturally falls down. So we're just going to tap it around, make it look like it's kind of splattered. Don't want to add too much. I haven't even picked up any of the pigment. I just want it to look like it's shooting out and creating a little spatter type of effect. It's up to you. You can go back in with some runny blood and you can add it here and let it drip down. We're not going to do that today. But just be creative and play around with it. And there you go, you have your final complete look. It looks like a really gross injury.
Well, there you have it. You've just gotten a look into some of the greatest horror secrets used in Hollywood. I'm Michael Berryman. Thank you for joining us.